If you never see your child ever, you've had an influence because you've left them fatherless. And so there's just nothing you can do to undo the fact that you're a dad and that you have influence.
Welcome, everybody, to the Dad Central Show. This is Drew Solon, and I am without my co host, Ed, today. So you did not hear the typical "What is up, everybody?" But we're still looking forward to having a great conversation and bringing some great insight in for you as listeners. So, since it'll be a quicker intro today, I'm just going to get right to it and let you know that the Dad Central Show is sponsored by Dove Men Plus Care. Dove Men Plus Care believes that care is the best of a man because when men care for themselves and others, there is a positive impact. So today, we're really fortunate to have Nick Adams on the show. So Nick is after decades as a youth camp founder and director, a pastor, a business owner, and a commercial and residential landlord, Nick has written his first book, Being the Dad You Wish You Had: 5 Big Stones for Effective Fatherhood. So, Nick, welcome to the Dad Central Show. So glad to have you here.
Awesome. It's great to be with you, Drew. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, as am I, because right off the bat, the title of your book really grabbed my attention. And part of it is because of the work that I've been doing, but that message really resonated with me and almost word for word, probably about, I'd say, 7 years ago, when talking with another dad, and he expressed a very almost word for word saying, like wanting to be the dad that I wish I had. And so,
Mm.
we're definitely going to get to the book, but there's always a story. There's always a journey before getting to that point. And so that's how we like to open the show, is get to know a little bit more about you and how, a little bit about Nick before you became the author who's writing this great book. So can you do that by starting just telling us a little bit more about, your early years?
Okay. And I think, the title of the book, I'm so glad it resonates because I think whether you've had a good childhood and a really good dad or a really not good dad, it can always be better. You can always improve on that. And so in my situation, uh, my childhood was fairly rocky. My relationship with my father was somewhat rocky. I opened the book with a story that I was about 11 years old, and my mother and I were at a church service. And when the service was over, we had gone out to eat dinner with some friends. And when we get back to the church, my father is there and he's drunk and he has a pistol and he threatens to kill my mother and to kill me. And I always wonder why I was included in that because he thought she was cheating on him, and I'm like, well, I don't, I'm just an innocent bystander, even if she was, like anyway. But so that kind of started a really rocky situation in my life. We were hidden in the back of a car. I was in the floorboard, and mom was laying on the back seat, and somebody drove us down, curvy back roads of Northeast Tennessee, and we kind of escaped from my father. And then we hid for several months, stayed for a little while in a hotel. And then after that, we went to live with some friends from the church and stayed there for a couple of months. And then, it was, memory being what it is, I don't remember exactly how long, but it seems like it would have been months before I saw my father again. And that reconnect was pretty uneasy for me as an 11-year-old boy, not having seen him since he threatened to do me bodily harm and threatened to harm my mom. And, and we're
Can
still
we pause
hiding
for a
from him.
second?
Yeah.
I just want to, I'm don't like to interrupt, but in this point, I feel like I'm just so curious. You know, you said Rocky, and then you said my dad threatened to kill my wife. Sorry, my mother and me. Rocky might be an understatement there, but the question is, the fact that you were reconnecting with this, your father, who, those are pretty significant threats. Um, like, can you just walk us through, like, what was that like for you even leading up to that? Like, what type of feelings were you experiencing?
Sure. So, as I'm getting ready to go and be with my father, who I haven't seen now for several weeks or a couple of months, there's a whole lot of anxiety, fear that he will harm me, that somehow he'll figure out where we are and come and harm mom and I. We met in a public place so that he wouldn't know where we were staying. And I still remember the anxiety of just getting in the car with him. And he had a farm, and he was always a farmer. And so we went to his farm. And, that whole ride, I was really on pins and needles, just uncertain of what would happen next, what the next step would be. And after the first, Saturday that I spent with him, that became a little more, the anxiety lessened, and but initially there's just a whole lot of anxiety around the idea of what's this going to be like, and feeling like somehow as a child I would mm, accidentally give him a clue as to where we were living, and then expose my mom and I to danger.
Mm. Yeah, sounds like a really hard place for 11 or 12-year-old to be in, feeling like you've got to protect yourself, but also protect your mother, while still trying to be in some form of relationship with your father. Yeah, really challenging. And so, how
Yeah.
did things progress, and how did you, I guess, move beyond that?
Yeah. Well, with time, I got with him basically every Saturday while I was younger. Every Saturday, every other Saturday. It wasn't like written in stone, but we would meet somewhere. Um, he'd pick me up. We'd go spend the day at his farm, and just the more that happened, the more, I'll just say, comfortable I was. Just let me use a different word. The less afraid I was, because initially
Okay.
there's just a lot of fear and anxiety, and the more we did it, the less anxiety I had, the less fear there was, and the more normal our relationship became. I don't think even before that event, I wouldn't say my dad and I had a real close relationship. Um, Even when he was at home, he was fairly absent. And so, really, there wasn't this great, building back some kind of close relationship with my father. But we got back to the place that I was able to go and be comfortable being with him. I wasn't, in fear for my life. Eventually, he found out where we were living, and he would come and pick me up at our house as things normalized. And then over the years, as I got older, I would drive myself, obviously, to see him when I got a license. And then the more freedom I had, the less I would go. I went every week, every other week, and then I'd go every 2 weeks or once a month, and then it was, yeah, once a month or once a quarter, and that just really kept backing back because I had more interest and I wanted to do things that teenage boys want to do, and that isn't always hang out with your dad. And so, that really kind of staged back for a while, where I would have less and less contact with him. Still semi, I would call it regular, but not frequent. And then after I got married and had children, and he had granddaughters, uh, everything turned again. And he very much wanted to engage with my kids and wanted to be a part of their lives. And for the first time, he would come to my home, like, just to hang out, just to visit. Because after I got a home, I was single for a number of years. And so I owned a home and invited him to come. And, like, he never showed up at my house. But then after I had grandkids, that changed a little bit. He began to come to see the grandkids.
Mm. Okay. And so, I mean, not easy, obviously, having gone through that experience, and time, as you said, has been an important part of that. But what was that like for you to see his interest and desire to be more involved after you had become a father?
It didn't really surprise me because he really loves. I mean, he likes kids. He's he loved. He's deceased, so we should use the past tense there. But he
Amen.
really
Yeah.
enjoyed children, and he really loved little girls. Like he wanted a little girl, which I think was an angst for he and I as well, because he really wanted a little girl that he could nurture and love on, and just all the stuff. And so when he had these granddaughters, I wasn't super surprised that he was interested in more involvement with them, and more involvement with me, but especially because I've got kids that he can be a part of their life. And I think as he aged, one of his regrets, one of the things he expressed to me on his deathbed is just, I wish I had done better. I could
Mm,
have done better. I could have been a better father. I wish I had. I could have been a better husband to your mom. I wish I had. Because, and
mm,
he said, one of the things I realized is, if your mom and I were still together, then you and the grandkids would be a central part of my life, because I know you see her more often. And so then you would see me more often. And so he had that sense of, I wish I had done this differently so that there had been more connection.
mm. Yeah, there's a real sense of regret, right? As
Yeah.
you just share that story, and you hear stories of like that, where people are towards the end, and they recognize, man, if I had done this different, I had done that different, so mm, unfortunate in some respects, especially for those who are experiencing it, but very powerful in terms of, hey, we're here now. What can we
Right.
do? How can we make the most of the time we have? How can we not have that same sense of feelings of regret? Um, no, that's just my sense, but there's a lot we could go into there, and I guess maybe, what was it like for you to hear your father say that at that time?
You know, yeah, that is a great question, because when we got to he ended up with lung cancer, and he had heart issues, and so he spent his last few months living with me and my family. And so there was a whole lot of reconciliation that happened by that time, and just sharing, and some honesty, and there were, it was several months that he was very sick, and he and I both knew he was, just any day he could go. And so there were a lot of good conversations in that. And I was a little naive, because really I thought, oh, this is good. We're kind of wrapping all this up. And so all the angst I've got, with him, and all the issues from the past, this is kind of all going to be resolved. And then I can go forward. So this is great. And it was very helpful, and it was very healing, and it did bring clarity to some things where you're just like, why in the world was it like that? But what I found out was, you just never get totally disconnected from the man you call dad. And
Mm,
his influence continued in my life, both in positive ways and in negative ways. That he is still a part of my makeup. He's a part of my worldview. He's a part of the way I interact with my kids and with the world, for good and bad. I mean, some of the things I do, it's because I know he did them wrong, and I'm trying to do them differently. And
mhm.
some of the things I do, it's like, oh, this was really a good thing that my father did, and so I want to model that as well. And so, although there was a lot of reconciliation, one of the surprises for me in life was, oh, dad is still having a lot of impact in my life.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. We had John Smithbaker on the show. He's an author. He's a creator of Fathers in the Field, and the book his recent book was called "Man Enough to Forgive," and
Ah,
forgiving your father for that father wound. And so, in your sharing the idea of the reconciliation, there's a lot going on. I was reflecting on that conversation and the importance and power of forgiveness in that process, but your point you're making, I think, is also very crucial. Is that even after maybe there was reconciliation and even forgiveness, there's still this imprint. There's this influence, and as you said, there's both good and bad. Can you maybe talk a little bit more about that, and what you've come to realize in the process of going through that?
Yeah, and I think, back to your topic of just forgiveness, I think that is huge. And I had like a real moment in my late 20s. I was about 28, 29, where it just hit me so powerfully that my childhood got stolen from me. And so
Mm,
at about that age, I started really working through forgiving my dad, particularly, but also my mom, because, that stuff happens on both sides. And so just to be able to forgive, that had already happened. And so then you move forward about another decade and a half, and I'm still then finishing out the process of reconciling and hearing more about the things that affected his life and created some of the choices that he made, good or bad. Uh, so that was really quite a process. And then, as you're saying, there are so many things that we can learn from our fathers, whether they did everything right or whether they did everything wrong. But for me, the challenge is, although I think my dad made a lot of mistakes, and most people would agree that he probably wouldn't win a fatherhood award. At the same time, looking back, I realize lots of good traits that he instilled in me. And, not because he was trying. I think that's really important too. And my dad, one of my biggest fears when I became a father was, I mean, it's probably most fathers' biggest fears, but I just had no idea what I was doing. Like, I felt so clueless.
mm,
And particularly because I didn't have a great role model. But I would, people will tell stories about, oh, my dad always said, and then they'll give you this little nugget, this little phrase that dad said to him all the time. And I just didn't have one of those, or, my dad taught me, and it's like, honestly, I had nothing. I could not tell you, I couldn't think of a single thing that my dad worked on instilling into me, but he instilled a lot in me. And so I think that's so fascinating. It's one of the things that I always want to say to dads. You don't know what you're putting into your kids. You don't know how much you're teaching them and giving to them just by being whoever it is that you are. And so one of the things that my dad put into my life was a love for simplicity. I realized recently, I tried to describe it in the book, but just the other day it hit me. My dad was a minimalist before minimalist was cool. I mean, like, he just didn't care about things. He didn't care about success. He didn't care about the American dream. He wanted to live a simple life. He was a farmer. He lived in a simple home, and things weren't important to him. He drove a car that was so old it was ridiculous. Um, but that's what I mean, it really was what he wanted. It wasn't that he couldn't have done different. I mean, he might not have been able to do different either, because he also wasn't, he didn't have a high school degree and a high school education. And so, I don't know how much different he could have done, but it really was what he wanted. Because when we got to the end of his life and he started talking about regrets, there was no regret about, I wish I had provided better for you. I wish I had money to send you to college. I mean, there's none of that. It was, I wish, relational things. But he was very content with where he was as far as finances and affluence and things. And so my dad was a minimalist. Now, I am not a minimalist. I kind of wish I could be. I'm rather fascinated with tiny houses, and I follow several tiny house things on social media, and I'm nowhere near a minimalist. But I do have a capacity to enjoy simple things. And I do have the capacity to sit by a creek and just love the moment and be there. I can go into nature and spend, all day sitting on a peak looking out over the valleys. And I think that is a part of just having a simple life and being able to enjoy and appreciate simple things. Another example of that is my dad was very generous. He never had anything. Like, I've already said, he didn't have anything. He barely made more than minimum wage at any time in his life. He lived just above the poverty line, um, and yet he worked at a bowling alley. He was the machinist at a bowling alley, And so we were at a bowling alley one day, and they were taking up a collection for someone who had some kind of need. I don't remember what it was, medical, or something happened, and they were taking up a collection for this guy. And I still remember just being shocked, like everybody's putting in $1, $5, $10 maybe. And my dad, who probably not, I don't even think I have to say probably, was the person with the least money in the circle, gave $100 bill. And I was just like, oh my, wow, but he lived that way. And you just watched him all the time, because he wasn't chasing money and the dream and all that stuff. He could just give it away. And that's something that I find in myself. I've started 2 or 3 nonprofits, and one of them was to take care of orphans, and we've adopted an orphan, and we've taken care of foster kids in our home. And it's very difficult for me to pass someone with a sign that says, willing to work for food or whatever. I mean, I don't always give them money, but I always give them an opportunity. Like, I'll stop and say, hey, I've got work. You want to come work? I've got work. And so I just see my father in all that, just that sense of taking care and helping others.
Are you a dad who feels like you're juggling a million things at once? Balancing work, family, and personal goals can be overwhelming. But what if there was a solution? That's why we created our new fatherhood community called Dad Mentor. For over 20 years, Dad Central has built practical tools to help dads. We understand the challenges you face and provide the support you need to thrive. The biggest complaint we hear from dads is there's no dedicated support for their specific needs. But not anymore. Our new community, called Dad Mentor, is here to transform your fatherhood experience. Imagine feeling in control, staying calm and patient when your children misbehave. Picture yourself connected to your children, guiding them with confidence and watching them succeed. When you join Dad Mentor, you'll have access to a community of like-minded dads committed to their dad journey, just like you. You'll also get the Dad's Roadmap. This is a step-by-step plan to help you go from unsure to unstoppable as a dad. Monthly masterclasses and Q&A sessions. You'll get answers and know exactly what to do straight from experts. Monthly group meetups that connect dads over common topics. A dad's resource library. Curated webinars, podcasts, or guides built by Dad Central to help you grow as a parent. And finally, you'll also get exclusive members-only offers and events. Now, many dads do try to do this fatherhood thing alone, only to find themselves trapped in frustration and strained relationships. Then they may turn to unhealthy coping mechanisms like drugs, alcohol, or other distractions, leaving their family and their own well-being at risk. We don't want you to reach that point of regret. Take steps to invest in you and your family today. Join Dad Mentor and go from stressed, tired, and overwhelmed to confident, calm, and connected. Join us today by going to dadcentral.ca/dads. Sharing and explaining the influence, the impact that your father, both observing and just experiencing him, has meant to you. When we talked at the beginning of this season of the show, we talked about this theme of breaking the cycle of fatherlessness, and we also think that fathers, one, they're not supported, and one, it's not known how valuable and important they are in terms of the influence they can have. And you're, I think, a great example of talking about that influence and how much of fathers impact, as you age, and you never really lose that. And so the idea of breaking this cycle of fatherlessness, you've had some barriers to being an active, engaged father yourself, but you just also shared that, you're now adopting, you're being a father to not only your children, but also to others' children. So can you maybe talk a little bit about, how important is, what have you done in your own life to break or begin breaking and reversing that cycle of fatherlessness that you experienced?
I think I would like to spend an entire podcast talking about this topic because it is so important. And I think we live in a culture that downplays fatherhood, maybe downplays men because of the negative stereotypes that have happened for masculinity, and so I find that most people don't even know the research about how impactful dads are. But there's a wealth of research. If you Google, there's all kinds of research out there about how important fathers are and what a father does for a child in their self-worth and their academic ability, and it just goes on and on. There's socialization and one of the things I loved when I was writing the book, because I did this kind of research when I was writing the book, and one of the things I loved was how important dad play is, because
Mhm.
you kind of think you're just goofy,
Right.
but really dad play is huge for socialization and to help kids learn cues. And I'm like, oh man, that's fantastic. Like I was just having a ball and I was doing something important and I didn't even know it, and so I think that is so, so important. And I think as fathers, one of the things I'm hoping that this book will do is help anybody who reads it to say, I'm important. I have a seat at the table. I've got something to bring to my child that honestly no one else can do. No one can be that influence. Now, other people can influence, and I know there's people who are in all kinds of states, and their interaction with their father is got all kinds of issues, and at the same time, just to emphasize again and again into our culture that a dad does something for his kids that no one else can do, and so that makes it hugely important. And so if you have obstacles to overcome, I mean, the thing I say is you've got to find a way to overcome them.
Mhm.
If it's internal obstacles like I started out with, of I'm clueless, I have no idea what I'm doing, then you intentionally think about what you want that to look like. I read everything I could get my hands on. I went to courses about fatherhood and about being a dad. I had people around me that I really admired because, you mentioned earlier, I worked with teenagers for most of my adult life, and so when I was working with teenagers, I would, man, if they had lots of characteristics that I really wanted to see in my kids, I'd kind of get some time with those dads and say, what are you doing? Talk to me about what's happening. And I just recently, I'm a pastor, I think you mentioned, but I just recently got to do a funeral for one of these dads who
Mhm.
he had just been such an example to me. I'd got him to come in and teach a class to my uh, kids' parents for the youth group, and and just gleaned so much from him. And when I did the funeral, as I was driving, he was in South Carolina, about 3 hours from where I'm at in Tennessee. And as I was driving down there, it dawned on me that all the big stones that I have in my book came from Paul Hively. And and I didn't even realize it. Like when I was writing the book, I wasn't like doing that. But when I started really reflecting on the book and his life, I realized, wow, those principles are things that I picked up from Paul, and I've integrated them into my life and then into this book.
Mhm.
So I think, to engage in fatherhood, one of the key things I believe is find sources. I think, folks who are listening to this, they found you guys, and that's part of what I'm talking about. To find people who can be your mentor. And a mentor to me isn't somebody that you like have to be with regularly. I think you are mentoring fathers with this podcast. I think people
Thank
who
you.
write books are mentors. I think there's so many ways to find mentors. And so I commend you for what you're doing. And the guys who are here, they're doing what I would recommend. They're finding people to just help shed light on the path.
Mm. Yeah, that's so powerful and so appreciated. This idea of having community around you, but also, your intentionality of going out and seeking it and gathering information, and the influence that a father figure or a mentor or somebody who's there to learn and glean information from just really seems like so crucial. to that ability to, move towards ending this fatherlessness in your own life or in other people's lives. And so, especially when you said, when I reflected it and saw that the 5 big stones that I've written about actually came from this one gentleman because of your relationship with him and what you observed. So can we talk about those? Can you give us a rundown of what are these 5 big stones that anyone can take and hopefully begin moving forward in this process?
Sure. And the idea of 5 big stones, it's just that you can't do everything. Like I I get frustrated sometimes if people are like, here's 101 things to do to be a great dad to daughters, or here's 20 things to do to be a fantastic father. I can't do 20 things. I can't even
A long
remember 20
list.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember 5 honestly, but if you think about the things that are most important, and you used the word a minute ago, intentionality, and that's really what the 5 big stones are. I'm not trying to tell people how to be a dad. I'm trying to help people think about what are things to think about that I want in my own life as a father, because it's really about me being who I want to be so that I can be the father that I want to be. And so, when we talk about the 5 big stones, the first one we've kind of talked around a little bit. It's the power of being. And it's just the idea that I'm an important person. I'm an important person in the life of my children. It's important that I show up. It's whether I want to have influence or not, I have influence. And I can't negate that. Like if you never see your child ever, you've had an influence because you've left them fatherless. And so there's just nothing you can do to undo the fact that you're a dad and that you have influence. So you're just a lot of power in just being. And
Yeah.
then kind of tied into that, the next step is, since you have so much power, be intentional and
Yeah.
be present.
Can we
So
pause
that
for a
when you
second?
absolutely.
Because that power of being, I want to mention 2 quick stories that when fathers who are, let's say, not in the home or not actively involved in their kids' lives, or for some reason being prevented from being in their lives, I think dads might often feel like, well, how am I going to do that? Or I'm traveling like, 6 months a year. I'm in the military. So how can I do that when I'm not there? And I think I just want to address this point because dads might often feel like, well, I can't do that. Well, I want to share 2 stories that hopefully will illustrate ways you can. So the first story is, I was just on a podcast about parental alienation and fathers who have been alienated from their families. And the story was from the daughter of one of these men. And for 4+ years, this father would simply send a text message every week, every single week, faithfully, thinking of you, whatever. And the daughter chose not to respond, not to engage, but faithfully for over 4 years. Eventually, though, it stopped. And then the daughter shared years later about how hard that was for her.
Mm.
And she didn't understand or know why, but that influence of his faithful pursuit essentially helped her feel his presence, or that he was being there. And so even that act of you not being responded, you're being present. So you can do things. The other one, you know what? Actually, I think I'll just leave that story so that anything that you can do. Oh, actually, no, the other one is a personal story. I I've shared my story before, but my father abducted me when I was 3 years old, and 4 years kind of on the run. My mom was trying to get me back. But I was going back over my mom's records of things when probably like 4 or 5 years ago. And my father had written a letter to me when I was about 10 or 11. I didn't really remember it, but I reviewed and read that letter, and in it, my father expressed his love, his appreciation, etc. And it broke me down. I actually felt how much my father loved me through his letter that he wrote when I was 10 or 11. And so I guess I share those 2 stories to say the power of being doesn't have to be right in that moment there with your child, even though it's crucial and important. There are other ways that fathers can be. And I just want to make sure that anyone who's listening who might be in a situation where they don't have access or aren't able to necessarily be physically present, you can still be. And I want you to take that. Anyways, so sorry for the interruption. Stage 2.
That Drew, I think that is so important, and I don't think you could overstate how powerful that is to do. Even if you can't be physically present, you still can be. And I love the text. You know, I've got some stories like that myself, where I know folks who had their child would not respond to them at all, mostly because of the influence of the mother that was very negative and
Hmm.
caustic. But they just kept faithfully engaging, and I've seen the power of that over long term. And so I think that's huge. And even if we're able to be in the home, even if you're living with your kids, you can't always be as present as you want to be. I mean, you meant, you're a traveling salesperson, or you just have to travel for work, or there's all kinds of things that impact that. And so this is never a, ooh, feel bad about you because you can't be present. It really is, look how powerful you are, that however you can be present, it'll make a difference. And so maybe you don't get but 5 minutes a morning with your kid, but if you engage in that 5 minutes, and I don't mean teaching them something, or I just mean looking them in the eyes and going, gosh, good morning, how are you? Yeah, that's really what I'm talking about. I think one of the things that we get so hung up on is those big moments where we're doing that really important, make sure they know this. I'm not sure kids remember that,
Mm.
but they remember if you tell them you love them every day. They remember if every time they walk by you, you just put your hand on their shoulder. That's the kind of presence, that I'm thinking about. Or you send them that weekly text, or you make sure they never have a birthday or a Christmas that they don't get a gift from you, even if they can't see you and they never see you and there's no interaction except that. It still says, Dad cares about me. And I may not be able to understand why he isn't right here, but I know he cares. And so, there's just that power of being.
Yeah, absolutely. Very well said. Okay, from being to.
To the second big stone is to model the way.
Mm.
And it really, there's 4 chapters in there. One of them is, that the dad is the teacher and the guru, that you're the person that your kids are looking to, even when you don't know it. And they're learning from you. And again, I don't think kids learn the most when we're trying to teach. I think they learn the most as they just watch us live life. And so, they're looking at who you are and what you're doing and what you value. And one of these chapters is about values. And I've at the end of each chapter, there's a reflection section that you can kind of work through and see where you are and see things you want to think about. And because really, I think intentionality is so huge for fatherhood. And so it's just to help you be intentional. But the section on values, there's a whole list of values. And so again, they're all values. They're all valuable. They're all really good things. But I can't do 40 things. I can't focus on 40 things I want to pass on to my kids. So, but I can focus on 4 to 7, that are just important to me. And so I make sure and live them out. I make sure they're a part of my life. And so I think as we think about ourselves and try to be intentional as fathers, we have to realize that our kids are following in our footsteps. And so that is kind of the second big stone, and it breaks down into a lot of different pieces there. Like I said, there's 4 different chapters in there, but that's the central idea.
Yeah, I think that power of modeling is so important. The phrase "much more is caught than taught" really resonates for that whole section. I
Absolutely.
think what you're saying. Okay, 3, 4, and 5. Are you able to share those with us?
Absolutely. Uh, Big stone number 3 is kind of it's one of my favorites anyway, and I think it's because it's easy to get a hold of, but it's be lovable.
Mm.
Um, you know, and most people are like, that's a strange thing to have as a big point, be lovable, but it's important that often in our culture, dads tend to be a little less emotionally available, a little less emotionally engaged, maybe a little more. they're the authoritarian, maybe they're the disciplinarian. And so you kind of get all these ideas about who dad is. And if you think about mom, it's like, oh, she's loving and she's cozy, and you think about dad, it's like, oh, he's rigid and he made sure we were okay and we were provided for, and all that stuff's good. But we've got to work on being lovable, because my goal is to have long-term relationship with my kids. My goal is to win my kids' heart. I'm not really trying to raise kids. I'm trying to raise adults. I'm trying to raise successful
Mhm.
adults. And so I'm thinking on down the road beyond this moment to what can I do to engage my kids in ways that capture their heart, that let them know how much I care about them and how much I love them. And so when they look back, they really do think, oh, dad was a place of just secure. I always knew I was loved. I always knew whatever happened, he'd be there for me. That's what I'm trying to engender. And so, the third big stone is to be lovable, to capture your kids' hearts, and to be the hero they need. Because gosh, one of doing the research, one of the little things I found is how many times, if you ask children about their father, they'll use the word hero.
Hmm.
That dads are heroes. They're heroes to their daughters. They're heroes to their sons. And so just how important it is to understand that we're somebody's hero. And so to live that out, and in the book, I talk about being a hero and the fact that, if you think about Spider-Man, like I love Spider-Man because he's not like, I mean, Superman can do anything. Like, what's up with that? Like, you can, pick up everything, you can see through everything. There's just, I mean, I'm not even sure that doesn't do much for me. But Spider-Man, I mean, he's just a guy, and he's got some cool tools, but he's just kind of a guy. But he always shows up. He shows up to make a difference, and he engages, and when there's danger, he's there. And so to me, that's a father. And I want my kids to know that I'm super lovable and that I'm their hero. I'm going to be there. You're never. One of the things I say to my kids all the time is, I will always be for you.
Mhm.
And I'm going to always, I try every day, for sure. Every other day, I'll tell my kids, I will always love you. There's nothing. I'll interact with them like, what can you ever do that dad won't love you? And the answer is always nothing. I'm like,
Mhm.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm always going to love you. I may not like what you do. I may be disappointed in something you do. Hey,
Mhm.
I might disagree with something you do, but I will always love you. There's nothing you will ever do that will cause me not to love you. And so that's big stone number 3 is to be lovable
Yeah.
and to express that.
I mean, many good things in there. Spider-Man reference, great. But here's a quote that I think references your idea of the hero influence of a father. When you ask them, and the research says, yeah, I view my father as a hero. With great power comes great responsibility.
Absolutely. One of my favorite lines.
And so many times, and dads might be like, well, I don't feel like I'm my kid's hero. I don't, and I think that's good because I think there's an element of humility there, but you have to recognize in your child's eyes, if they view you as their hero, are you using that great power with the same great responsibility? Um, okay. I just wanted to add that in there because I felt that was so good.
That's awesome.
Okay.
Yeah. So big stone number 4 is that we can create the foundation of self-worth in our kids. And so it's just thinking about and talking about what are the things that we need to do to help our kids feel their own worth, to feel their own sense of empowerment. And, like I said earlier, I'm not trying to raise kids, I'm trying to raise adults. And so, what are the things that I'm going to instill into my kids to help them be able to be the adults that they can be, not necessarily the adult that I want them to be, because,
Mm,
you know, I don't get to choose that, but how can I help them be the best version of themselves, and to fulfill their dreams and their goals and to be the person they want to be? What are the tools, that I can give them to be able to help them get that far. And, in this section, I think one of the big things I talk about in this part is to help dads think about, like I said earlier, I do very little like, here, you need to know this to be a good dad. I'm really trying to help you think about, what do I want to be as a dad? But in this section, I do talk about the stages of parenting and how that connects with discipline, because it's so important. My goal as a father isn't to discipline my kid, it's to instill self-discipline into them. It's, I'm trying to put parameters in place to help them understand how to have parameters in their own life and how to do that for themselves, because that's going to make them a successful adult. And so, and I believe that increases self-worth, because if I know that I can control my wants, and I know I can control my passion, and I know that I can control my reactions, then I can value myself more. There's nothing that makes me lose respect for myself more than just doing something really stupid. Like when I explode in anger, like that is terrible for my sense of self, because I look at myself and think, God, what? I mean, you should, that's terrible. But if I can control myself, then I come out of a situation where I wanted to be really angry or be out of control and I didn't. I'm like, wow, man, that's self-mastery. That's good stuff. And so I'm trying to help my kids learn those principles so they can have, a sense of self-worth. Because we went through a little season, I think, in our country, that in the Western world, that we wanted to give everybody awards. It didn't matter if they'd done anything worth awarding, you
Right.
know. And that backfired. Like, I think pretty much everybody acknowledges that just was a train wreck. And so now how do we build self-worth? Because it's super important, but it doesn't come by telling everybody, oh yeah, you're really good, and handing them an award. But so dads have the ability to instill true self-worth. And so that's what that section is about.
Yeah. Again, great insights. I think very powerful. Um, Dr. Peter Jensen, he's a sports psychologist, worked with Canadian Olympic teams, and also wrote a book, great book called Igniting the Third Factor. And so the third factor, there's nature, there's nurture, then there's choice. And when you're talking about this idea of self-discipline, that's really choice.
Right.
And how do you ignite people making the right choices, using good judgment, disciplining themselves? And he's got I think, great framework in the book that really helps you understand, how do you bring out the best in another person? And that's really what you're talking about. How do you ignite the factor as a dad? And that's part of your role in your child, so that they are learning and growing and developing and making the choices that are going to help them be the best version of themselves that they can be. So I just think that's such good stuff. And I think it's a fantastic fourth big stone.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
But
important.
so finish us off with your fifth big stone.
Yeah. Number 5 is to create, and I've already touched on this some, but to create an atmosphere of unconditional love and support.
Mm.
And so it's that idea that I think dad should call you to be your best, the best version of yourself. And in that process, sometimes we want to call people to their best in a way that leaves them feeling like they're their worst. We want to point out all the bad they do,
Mm.
instead of, and the motivation is we want them to get better, but instead to be able to say, really, I'm going to look at the things that are strong and that are good, and I'm going to try to pull those out in positive, uplifting, meaningful ways. I love the phrase of, if you catch somebody doing something right and you
Mhm.
reward them, and so I'm looking for those moments where I can tell my son, man, you did really well with that. The little guy we adopted, he's got some special needs, and is really we're at a difficult stage. Like I've laughed a lot because I released this book in the fall, and he went from elementary school to middle school in the fall. And to say that it's a train wreck would be really an understatement. And so, like, I'm releasing this book about being the dad you wish you had, and I've been in the principal's office more in the past 3 months than I have in my entire life, put together. And he's just struggling. He's just truly on the struggle bus. And so every time, and I hear myself, it is so hard. I hear myself telling him, don't do that and stop doing that. And, good grief, don't you, and it's just a lot of negative. I mean, I hear it a lot, and it really kind of crushes me because that's not how I want him to view himself. And so I'm working so hard on every time he does something right to make a really big deal out of it. Cause man, that was it. That's what I'm looking for. Like, he helped me unload the dishwasher and help with dinner the other night. And I'm like, man, you did a great job. And he did. I'm not, I'm not blowing smoke. He really is doing well. And so just to focus on the good things to try to reinforce those behaviors.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's such an important one, but a really hard challenge for most
Oh,
parents, I'd say, let alone but for dads who want to see the best for their children. And, this concept of, having an atmosphere of unconditional love. But unconditional love does not mean lacking standards. Unconditional love
absolutely.
doesn't mean lacking, accountability or some of the important areas. It's how do you do it in a way that they know no matter what, I'm still loved, I'm still accepted, and I'm valued, and I have value, and that they start to begin living out of that value of because I'm valuable, I'm going to make these types of choices that are different, but hard to get there when you are confronted with behavioral issues or challenges or things like that. And so I think it's a real, and thank you for, being a little bit vulnerable there and sharing. Like you're an author of this book on these five big stones, but the reality is every parent experiences difficulties and challenges, and we need to, I think, normalize it more as opposed to the opposite of where everyone's got their social media feeds and they're the perfect dad or they're the
Oh yeah.
perfect family and everything's great. Guess what? That's not real life. And
That is
so
not real life.
I love it when someone has the courage to be like, hey, it's hard, because truly it is. And we had Dr. Greg Fabiano. He's a clinical psychologist, runs programs for dads, created programs for dads. And he's, very much open and shared some of the challenges. You got three teenagers
Yeah.
and the child, and he's like, here I am, a clinical psychologist, I'm teaching people how to do this. And I'm coming home and then I'm catching myself being like, whoa, what am I doing? And then my kids call me. And so it can create some challenges. So I say that, dads or whoever's listening, let's just be real and normalize it and know it's okay to have difficulties. What matters is that you keep trying, you keep moving forward, and you become more and more intentional and more positive, we'll say, in your approach in ways that move the relationship in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is such good stuff. And I would just add to it, that not just to kind of see it for yourself, but one of the things that I think is very powerful is when we're able to say to our children, I blew that. I
Mm,
did that poorly and I'm really sorry. And I've had lots of conversations with my kids where I've just said, I am sorry that I was so angry with you. I totally overreacted. Can you forgive me? Or, when I've just made bad choices in relation to them. And I think we want to kind of project the best to our kids. It's kind of natural. But the truth is, when we can just own our stuff, it goes back to lovable. That is
mm,
so lovable when you're able just to be human and be like, wow, I really blew that. Wish I'd done that differently.
yeah. Lots more we could probably get into, but as we're kind of running down to time. And so as we wrap up, I like to ask our guests to share what's one question dads can be asking themselves based off of our conversation today. And then the follow up is, well, what's one action step that a dad can take to begin applying or moving forward based on what was shared today?
I think one question that I ask myself a lot, maybe that's, and I think it would be healthy for dads to ask themselves is, how do I want my children to experience me? What, you know, who do I want to be as dad? How do I want to be experienced? And it just takes some reflection. And we live in a culture that's not great with reflection. To be able to have time to really sit and think about who you are and how you're engaging the world and how you're engaging your kids. And it's one of the reasons I put reflective questions at the back of each chapter, is to try to help dads just say, who do I want to be, and how do I want to engage, my children. So I think to that intentionality to really engage with, how am I being perceived and how do I want to be perceived? So what do I need to change? I think that's it.
Okay. What about the action?
I think the action would be to find the time to reflect,
Okay.
and to be able to really think, maybe after a bad experience with your child, or maybe after a great experience with your child, or maybe just to be able to remove yourself. I'm real big on having time that's just me being alone thinking, and I think that enables you to reflect, and so whether it's going out in the woods or going fishing, or whatever it is you like to do, to be able to find that moment where you can just have a little period to reflect on who you are.
Yeah, that's such good stuff. Well, Nick, it's been a real honor. Thank you for being on our show, for sharing your insights with us, and talking about the real value that your book is hopefully bringing to dads, whoever's reading, wherever they're reading it. So, where can people find out more or get connected with you?
Yeah. You can find the book on it's www.beingdad being sorry dash dad.com, or you can email info@being-dad.com. You can get the book on Amazon. You can get it as a paperback or a digital version. There will be an audio version coming probably in the next couple of months, so that'll also be available soon.
That's great. Well, I highly recommend it. It grabbed me right from the beginning with your storytelling, and of course, those five big stones we heard about. There's a lot more value to unpack there. So, again, Nick, thanks so much for being on the show. Really looking forward to having our audience hear this.
Drew, it's been great being with you, and I appreciate all the things that you are doing and all the things you're sharing, and the impact you're making on the world. It's awesome.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Nick. Well, another fantastic conversation. And my only reflection is just, I think the power of that unconditional love. And it's not an easy balance to bring, but I imagine if you read Nick's book, you're going to have the simple roadmap of how to get there and how to do that. So, as we wrap up, I want to remind everyone that the Dad Central Show is sponsored by Dove Men Plus Care. Dove Men Plus Care believes that care is the best of a man, because when men care for themselves and others, there is a positive impact. I also want to let you know that you can find out more about our resources at Dad Central by going to dadcentral.ca. If you want to listen to more of our podcast episodes, you can do so at dadcentral.ca/podcast. And finally, we love to hear feedback. So whether that's you choose to go on and write us a review or rate the show, really would love if you'd be willing to do that. But you can also email us at podcast@dadcentral.ca. We get guest suggestions, we get comments, we get feedback, whatever it is, we love to hear it. So feel free to reach out there. And as my co-host always likes to end the show, don't just manage your time, manage your energy, and remember to give yourself grace. Take care, and we'll see you next time.